We are getting set for week number 15 in NFL DFS, and it's a pretty fun one because as we discussed on Monday in the preview podcast, we got a situation where there are actually some really palatable mid-range running backs and actually desirable is a word we can use for them, which is not usually the case. So our task for today is to rank the mid-range running backs, sort through some games that we want to stack, and there's not bad selections there either. So a pretty fun slate on tap for week 15. Let's dive on in and break it on down. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the Fanduel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, week 15 is on the horizon. How you doing today?
I'm good, but I think I heard you say that there's a lot of games to stack.
I didn't say a lot. I said there are some.
Okay.
Don't twist these words
here. I was going to ask.
No.
I was just going to ask.
Sure. You're going to twist my words.
We start doing the slate overview this year, just like the high-level stuff. And my question was, something we talk about is this game a 2-quarterback game? Is it a 1-quarterback game? Is it like a half-quarterback game? I count maybe 2 quarterback games this week. So I was just surprised to hear that coming from you. That's all. I had to get it correct from the start.
Having two quarterback games is more than we've had in like a decade.
I know isn't it weird? I feel like that's not
strange.
I feel like historically we'd have great games and it's like, well, you play both quarterbacks. It's just like,
right.
Which quarterback do you prefer? I feel like we haven't had a ton of those this year.
I know it's been strange, and it's been a pretty heavy deviation of my process not to be able to just build around those game stacks. I am building around game stacks still, but it's not like, okay, I have X number of Mahomes lineups, X number of lineups for the quarterback on the other side. I think there are at least a couple of situations where you can do that this week. I don't know if I actually get to 2, so maybe we might differ there. But there are some mini stacks that I like, and there are some games that are at least interesting from a stacking perspective. So we'll break things down here in just a bit. But first, the Week 15 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League is posted. As always, it's a $5 entry with 3 entries max, and it is rake-free. That means FanDuel makes nothing off of this contest. All entries go right back to you, the listeners. To enter, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. You can also get a link to it in the podcast post up on numberFire.com for the Week 14 recap if you're watching on YouTube right now, or on the Week 15 preview if you are listening to this after the fact. Eligibility restrictions apply. Again, FanDuel.com/league/listener league. $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake. You mentioned the slate overview. Let's dive into that for Week 15 here. And to me, the slate overview, at least for me, it begins with the running backs, the mid-range running backs, because when we have choices there, we can't just go 60% David Montgomery or whatever it was last week, or it would have been, rest in peace, 60% Myles Gaskin, alas. We can't do that this week because we have choices, which is nice. We can still go 60%, but we don't have to, which is fun. So that's the big thing for me, is starting off with those mid-range running backs and then trying to identify games where I think things will stay close and be high scoring. What about you? What are the big keys for you on this slate?
Yeah, we have a lot of double-digit spreads for some of the more interesting teams. But the number one thing for me is also the running backs. I feel like you always lead this off with running backs because it's kind of just the most important position on FanDuel, at least the most predictable of the skill position of the non-quarterbacks, let's say. So I was thinking the first thing that came to my mind was, how many games are there where we can play both quarterbacks? I count 2 being Kansas City, New Orleans, and Philadelphia and Arizona. Those are the games that I think I would realistically have exposure to both quarterbacks. I mean, I might have sprinkles of other quarterbacks, but not as a priority. And then my other thought was the 6,000 range at receiver is pretty depleted. So it reminds me of, we cover PGA all the time. And it reminds me of the weeks where the 9,000 range is barren. And it's do you just bump down or to the 8,000 range in that regard? This instance would be the 5,000 range for receivers. And even that is not that appealing. So I think that we're really going to have to lean on those mid-salaried running backs and then consider maybe not spending top dollar on quarterbacks all the time.
I counted 3 6,000 wide receivers I'd be okay using, and none of them are like priorities at their salary. Like I love Brandon Nyuke. I think he's awesome. But like at his salary, it's not like
he's barely a 6,000.
Right. And like I think that he's a great option, but like am I gonna prioritize him over having extra wiggle room at tight end or running back?
Right.
Probably not. Like that's tough. So I think that I agree with you where like that 6,000 range is rough. 7,000 range, we can party with that. There's some good options there for sure, but it is definitely a week where we need to dive into the wide receivers maybe a bit more than usual, just because I don't think there are a lot of obvious plays there outside of Tyreek Hill. Like Tyreek Hill, cool. I will talk about it anyway because why not? But it definitely does require extra thought this week. So we're talking about this mid-range running backs, talk about game stacks, and more. But let's dive into some injuries right now. Drew Brees seems likely to sit again this week, which would leave Taysom Hill at the helm. We'll talk more about that game in the trends section. Matthew Stafford didn't practice Wednesday, nor did Kenny Golladay. Interim head coach Darrell Bevell said they're considering playing Stafford with no practice, but Jeremy Fowler of ESPN said the team is not overly optimistic that Stafford will play. So I think the baseline assumption here is that Stafford and Golladay are probably both going to sit. Would you use any Lions against a very beatable Titans defense?
I was excited about this game, just assuming Stafford played, but assuming he doesn't, we would get Chase Daniel. He's been not necessarily great in his limited time. I think he's at like 160, 170 dropback since 2018. In that range, he's at negative 0.02 passing net expected points per dropback. The NFL average this year, and similar to recent years, is 0.14. So he's definitely off the pace there. But he's about league average in ADOT success rate. Gets sacked on 9% of his dropback. So it does hurt the offense. And the biggest issue is that there's no Chase Daniel discount for TJ Hawkinson at 6,200. Marvin Jones is 6,100. DeAndre Swift is 67. If I had to play one, it would be Swift, but I don't really think I'll be in on this offense if it's Chase Daniel, unfortunately.
Which is a bummer because, like, I would love the Titans passing game if we had Matthew Stafford in there because it'd be a more competitive game. I've been pretty okay with using Ryan Tannehill, Corey Davis, A.J. Brown for a while now, but like, it's just tougher. And it does downgrade Derrick Henry too. I know that we want running backs who are favored, et cetera, but like I want those late game big moments, those he's had a couple of games where he's had touchdowns in overtime this year, and he's probably not going to get that here. So it does downgrade him a bit, not enough to make him not the top running back on the slate, but it does downgrade him from where he would be if we had some more shootout potential in this game. Alex Smith didn't practice Wednesday and seems unlikely to play this week. Antonio Gibson also sat Wednesday. Are you going at any Washington players against Seattle here, assuming that Dwayne Haskins gets the start?
I mean, it's great matchup in theory, but it is a little bit different with Seattle playing the way that they are, not throwing the ball as much. They're playing slower. The difference between Haskins and Alex Smith this year has not been really anything in terms of efficiency. So I don't really view it as a change there. I would probably honestly have the most interest in Logan Thomas just because he's a tight end. He's running a lot of routes. I'll talk about him. He's one of my player picks because tight end is basically Travis Kelce or jump down.
Yeah,
to the 5,000 range, which it usually is, but it's
pretty rough. Right. Especially true this week. I think that this is not because of Haskins, but I'm kind of interested in buying low on Terry McLaurin because he was not on the injury report on Wednesday for the first time. I guess I haven't checked this, but it feels like it's the first time in a while that McLaurin has not been listed with anything, and he's been rough the past 2 weeks, but Haskins does have an ADOT that's an average depth of target that's about a yard higher than Alex Smith.
6.4 versus 5.4.
I mean, it's Taysom Hill versus Drew Brees with Dwayne Haskins being Taysom Hill. Weird world. But anyway, McLaurin, I think, is at least on the table. Yeah. I think that it would have to be a situation where, like, I'm going at DK Metcalf and I want to have a mini game stack. I think that I could get to McLaurin there. I don't think that Thomas is a bad option. I think that it makes sense that you'd be on him, but I think that I want to mention that I'm at least interested in McLaurin because he's not in the injury report, and I don't think that Haskins is, like you said, a downgrade at all. Maybe even an upgrade from before, and specifically from Alex Smith.
Yeah, I go through every game and I make my notes, and then at the bottom of every game, I figure out my love considerations for player picks at the end of this podcast. And all I had from this game was in parentheses is like that means a maybe Metcalf or mini stacks.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I could see myself getting there this week. It's hard to be super excited about it because the game is not that enticing, and they're wide receivers. We want wide receivers in really good games, but if I have a game stack where I'm building around running backs, I think, and I have extra wide receivers to burn, maybe that's a situation where I get there. The Bucs placed Ronald Jones on the COVID-19 list. We don't have details yet on whether he was a close contact with someone or if he actually tested positive. It sounds like if Jones can't play, he also has a pinky injury, so there's that too. So I guess I'm assuming he's not going to play. That's my assumption, whether it be because of the pinky or COVID. They said that Leonard Fournette would play the Ronald Jones role this week, but Fournette was also inactive last week, which is generally not a good sign. So it's hard to get excited about anyone in this backfield. We'll talk more about the Bucs in the trend section. Julio Jones missed practice again on Wednesday and was labeled as week to week by interim head coach Raheem Morris. The offense, as we know, not as good without Julio. So if he sits, how would it alter your view of this game against the Bucs?
Surprisingly, this is not yet a divisional rematch. They play again in week 17, which is just a very short.
There are a lot of matchups where twice in 3 weeks, which is really annoying.
No, but at least that's week 17, so that's not really a regular week.
Everything was trash then anyway, yeah.
No, without Julio, Calvin Ridley gets as much work as he can handle. I would consider Russell Gage, but the ceiling's not necessarily the highest from what he's been producing. And Matt Ryan is just not Matt Ryan without Julio. We know those splits; they're not very good.
Right. If it were Julio, if Julio were playing, I think this would be a 2 quarterback game. Yeah, I think for me at least.
Yes.
Without Julio, it's a 1. I still like Tom Brady, but it does downgrade Brady too because the odds that it shoots out are lower. So it's a 1 quarterback game right now. I think that Calvin Ridley, 27% of the targets and gains with Julio out are limited, 52% of the deep targets. He's awesome, but it's a downgrade, and it stinks for sure. Mm-hmm. The Baltimore Ravens placed receivers Marquise Brown, Miles Boykin, and James Prochet on the COVID-19 list. This is reportedly because they were listed as close contacts for a coach who tested positive. So because there's a 5-day window between then, they could come off the list by Sunday as long as they test negative during the week. So we'll talk more about the Ravens in this section on bookmakers. So the Miami Dolphins might be shorthanded this week. Myles Gaskin will miss due to COVID-19. Mike Gesicki is also expected to sit. Devontae Parker, Jakeem Grant, and Savon Ahmed were all limited on Wednesday. Matt Breida also came off the COVID-19 list. So it's a tough situation with all these injuries. So how are you viewing this offense against New England on Sunday?
I'm crossing out, I think, everybody but maybe Lynn Bowden.
Yeah. Would you use Bowden if both Parker and Grant are active?
No.
That's the issue that I have too. I think that he'd probably still play a lot because he played quite a bit in this game, but Parker got hurt pretty early too. So
this game,
it's tough. Yeah.
Well, it's also against the Patriots, who are going to ruin everything.
Right.
They won't be able to throw. Not that they do throw anyway, but Miami is such a good pass defense.
Right.
They're going to do everything they can to get out of there with 30 plays run if they can.
Right. And I can see Miami running up tempo just because I think that they would probably think they're better than the Patriots. And we saw them do that against Cincinnati. So that could be a good thing. But I also don't know if that's enough. If one of Parker or Grant sits, I'll use Lynn Bowden. If they both play, that's a little bit tougher. And also, if they both sit, the offense might not function well enough to be psyched about Bowden either. Any interest in the running backs? I don't feel like I'm getting there.
No, we have too many running backs to figure out this week for a change.
Right.
I don't think I need to be adding backs in a game with 41.5 point total.
Right.
I don't think that's the right play this week on an 11 game slate.
41.5 total in 2020. Thank great, man. Kyle Rudolph missed another practice on Wednesday. With him out in week 14, Irv Smith had 63 yards and a tutty. His snap rate was limited, but that was also expected because he was coming off an injury. Adam Schefter said before the game that Smith would play a limited role. He was a full practice Wednesday for the first time since week number 9, which is outrageous. So at $5,400, he's not a punt, but would you be willing to consider Irv Smith if Rudolph were to miss?
Yeah, any tight end with some sort of a pulse is in play, basically. Smith, as you mentioned, limited. I think he was at like 36% of the snaps and the routes. But 4 targets, 1 deep, 1 red zone, if I'm remembering right. So, I mean, it's something at least. He wouldn't be my favorite just because the passing volume there is always a concern, but he's in play.
Yeah, I think that he'd be pretty enticing. Like, I can't make him a priority because he hasn't had more than 5 targets in the game this year, but he hasn't also, I don't think he's played any full games with no Rudolph. So I'd definitely be there for sure if we get him without Kyle Rudolph. We'll talk more about that game as well in the bookmaker section. But first, let's dive into our trends for week number 15, starting off with one of the more appealing games on the slate. That is the Bucs against the Falcons. And this Bucs offense in flux, I feel like we've been trying to diagnose them for a while, unsuccessfully for the most part. What are you seeing with them entering this game with Atlanta?
Yeah, this is like a big question for me for the week because we have games with like 50.5 point totals. A lot of them have large spreads, so that is definitely a problem. And so one of the offenses I have the most interest in is the Buccaneers, but they are like a bane to my existence, honestly, with how they're distributing the ball. So I think it's a great spot this week against the Falcons. They're 23rd in adjusted pass defense based on numberFire's metrics. I know they were 32nd not that long ago, so they're trending up, but I will generally trust a larger sample whenever I can. And Tom Brady has been good in a lot of situations, which I'll talk about in a second. Tampa's implied team total is 5th highest among the 22 teams on the main slate at 28.25 points. But if you lop off the teams that are double-digit favorites, the Colts, only the Colts have a better implied team total. So I think that the Buccaneers are, again, one of the most interesting offenses of the week. The issue is that Tom Brady's not quite dominant right now, even since week 9 with Antonio Brown injected into that offense. But we want to target good games, and I think this definitely can be that. If you look at this team, if you look at Tom Brady since week 9 with Antonio Brown in the lineup, his passing net expected points per dropback mark is 0.12. The NFL average this year is 0.14, so he's not necessarily playing very well. His passing success rate is also about average, but he is above league average in ADOT, average depth of target, how far he throws downfield on average at 9.1 yards, and he's faced a lot of tough defenses. This sample includes 2 top 4 adjusted pass defenses, 2 more top half pass defenses when adjusted for opponents based on numberFire's metrics. And so he's had just one of those 5 games against the subpar defense. That was Carolina, put up 31.84 Fanduel points, 341 yards, 3 touchdowns there. Overall this season, Brady has 5 games against bottom half pass defenses. He's averaged 26.6 Fanduel points, 315 yards, 3 touchdowns. His per drop back passing net expected points number, 0.39. That's well above the league average. So he's taken advantage of good matchups. He hasn't really had many, just the one since adding Antonio Brown. So I do like Tom Brady this week. The issue is stacking him. The salaries are all fairly low, at least relative for what these guys can do in theory. Chris Godwin's salary, $7,200. Mike Evans, $71,000. Antonio Brown, $6,500. Rob Gronkowski, if you want to throw him in there, $6,300. But overall, since Brown joined the team, Mike Evans leads with 21% of the targets, which is pretty low for a wide receiver 1. He does have 2.4 downfield, 2.2 red zone targets per game. Brown and Godwin are tied with 18% of the targets. Gronkowski's at 13%, but all 4 have averaged at least 1 downfield target per game. The problem is like the single game upside. The most Fanduel points a pass catchers had in this span is 18.5 for Evans against the Chiefs. He had 16.7 against the Panthers, and then nobody else has gotten above 15. Looking at the in-game target shares, and we rip, or at least I rip on the Colts all the time for rarely giving their pass catchers a 20% target share and like never really getting to 30. The highest in-game target share for one of these pass catchers for the Bucs in this sample is Mike Evans at 28% against Carolina. Antonio Brown was at 27% against the Rams. And then you have to drop down to 22% for Godwin and Evans against the Chiefs. So as far as like raw volume goes, it's not quite there. There are 3 games where receivers had double-digit targets, and Godwin, Brown, and Evans have all had 1. So it's not even somebody getting the majority of those. There's been 1 100-yard game. That was Rob Gronkowski against the Chiefs. So it's just so spread out. I like Tom Brady. I think he's in a really good spot. I think that he can take advantage of a positive matchup, but I don't know what to do about the pass catchers. And they're all in that salary range where I think I'll probably be living for wide receivers, but nobody jumps out. So I don't know what to do here. I would lean Mike Evans if I had to for the downfield work, but I don't really want to prioritize any pass catcher, and I might play Tom Brady by himself. So any thoughts here?
No. Don't play Tom Brady by himself. Come on. Evans. You just use Evans. Like, you kind of, like, you mentioned why we should love Evans, but, like, I know the overall target share is, like, not great, but, like, think about Calvin Ridley. When Julio Jones plays, Calvin Ridley's target share is, like, 23%. But, like, they're a pass-heavy offense. Buccaneers should be here. He gets high leverage work. Mike Evans gets that. Even last week when he was banged up, he still had 2 downfield targets when they threw, like, 5 times. He had 11, 9, and 9 targets. You mentioned double-digit targets. He was 1 short of that in 2 games. Yeah. He has, in these games, he has 1 downfield target, then 3, 2, 4, and 2. We know that he gets all the red zone work. I think that Mike Evans is, like, a cut above everyone else in this pass-catching core when he's, like, healthy. And, like, I think he's healthy right now. So, to me, I think it's decently obvious where I just go Tom Brady, Mike Evans, run it back with Calvin Ridley, and then log out. Like, that to me feels pretty logical. I don't know if I'm like, I know that it could go poor, but like it could go poor for everyone. Like, I can't use that as like a justification for not going there. I think that if I'm looking for upside, looking for high leverage targets, you stack Tom Brady with Mike Evans, run it back with Calvin Ridley, and let the points pile up, baby.
So it's always hard to define upside, but it doesn't concern you the lack of 100-yard games. I know it's arbitrary, but there's
I look at the same cutoff. So I think that what you're doing is correct. But like, it's also been tougher matchups, like you alluded to. That's a concern. I think that this game environment is pretty good. Like, he had a fine matchup last week against Minnesota, but like they ran like 12 plays. So I think that when you blend everything together, this is probably the best environment they've had for offense since Antonio Brown arrived. So although he has not gotten to 100 yards, I think that the building blocks, going back to that phrase, the building blocks for a 100-yard, 2-touchdown game are there, and Mike Evans is like 77% likely to hit both those thresholds on Sunday.
So we're both in on Evans as the top pass catcher here. That's not really the question I had. The bigger question is Mike Evans a priority play? Are you going to play him outside of game stacks? Would you play him in a single entry lineup without Tom Brady or without Calvin Ridley on the other side? Because I don't know if I'm quite there.
If I'm not using Tom Brady, probably not, because like that to me says, okay, this must be one of your lineups using the Chiefs. So you're going Mahomes Hill. Like, it kind of answers the question for me. So it's not because I am averse to Mike Evans.
Okay.
It is because I just know that I'm using the Chiefs, in which case it'd be harder to use Evans there.
So the real reason I dug into this is because I see a lot of good in Tom Brady, and I think overall the sentiment might be a little bit lower than it should be. Mm-hmm. And I want receivers in that like low 7,000 to mid 6,000 range, because there's not a whole lot there that jumps off the page. Like in the 6,000 range overall, I just don't see enough to like make Mike Evans a core play.
Yeah.
But he is obviously the best of this pass catching group. We're on the same page there, but I can't build around any of these Tampa Bay receivers unless it's a game stack, and then it's just going to be Evans. And even then he might guess wrong, and he might get 20% of targets.
I think that like the odds that I guess wrong are decently high with Mike Evans, but I know that like the odds, if I'm right, the upsides that are big enough where I'm okay with it, I'm okay with the downsides. So I think for me, it's worthwhile to take shots at Evans. I think that I'd put Godwin 2, Gronk 3, Antonio Brown 4 You could talk me into putting Gronk second, but I don't think you could talk me into putting Brown above Godwin or Gronk.
I'd probably put Gronk
second.
Fourth.
Last?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't. I like that. He's been getting enough high leverage targets where I feel pretty good about him. No concerns here. What could go wrong?
There's so much bust potential in his.
What could go wrong with trusting a dude who literally retired last year? What could go wrong? Let's move on to my first trend here and talk about those mid-range running backs. And because again, I think this is a big key for this slate is dissecting the mid-range guys. And I've actually got quite a few who are viable. I'm going to define the mid-range here as, let's say, $7,500 through $6,500. That is a cherry-picked range to include the guys who I want most, but it's our podcast, therefore it's our rules, so deal with it. I'm cherry-picking. I don't care. But I want to look at their workloads in their most relevant samples. Basically, this means what have they done in their current roles with the relevant personnel around them. And the key data point for me will always be adjusted opportunities. As always, that is carries plus 2 times their target total, because a target for a running back is worth twice as much as a carry on Fanduel because they have PPR site. So basically just double the targets. Very easy. Based on that number in each person's most relevant sample, Cam Akers is a standout play at $6,700. He has been the Rams lead back for 2 games, and in those 2 games, he's averaging 29 adjusted opportunities per game. That ranks second on the entire slate among all running backs, trailing just Dalvin Cook. His 144 yards from scrimmage in that time are also second on the slate, trailing, again, just Dalvin Cook. And he actually got work in the passing game in Week 14. I entered Week 14 liking Cam Akers a lot, but I love him now because he got 3 targets there, and he got 3 targets pretty early. So I think this is a good, safe workload. He's also been involved close to the goal line. 56% of the team's red zone chances in this 2-game span. That's a really big number. And that's why Akers works for cash games. And I think he is among the best backs in the slate. Once you consider salary, single entry guy, I'd have a really tough time not having Cam Akers in that lineup. The reason you don't need to shovel Akers into every tournament lineup is game environment, because the Rams are 17.5-point favorites over the Jets, and that means we're not going to get late game targets for Akers, which does hurt his ceiling at least a tiny bit, and that's picking nits. He's still elite, but it's at least worth considering. Second place for me in this range is between Jonathan Taylor and David Montgomery. Montgomery has a better workload in the sample. In 8 games without Tariq Cohen, 8 full games, I should say, because he left one with a concussion, he's at 25 adjusted opportunities per game. That's 100 yards from scrimmage and 39% of the team's red zone chances. Those are all really solid numbers. He's facing the Vikings, who are not an overly difficult matchup, but Taylor gets I know if you look at success rates allowed, Minnesota's a better matchup, but overall defense, Houston sucks, man. Jonathan Taylor averaging 138 yards from scrimmage per game the past 3 games with 24 adjusted opportunities per game. His big downside is the red zone role. In that sample, he has just 21% of the team's red zone chances. So I am going to put Taylor a hair higher because the matchup is so good. There is upward mobility in that red zone role. No one's saying he can't get red zone work. He did earlier this year. But Montgomery's close, and if there winds up being a massive popularity gap, I'd be okay pivoting to Montgomery for tournaments because he does have the better overall workload. So putting Taylor first, Taylor second, Montgomery third, but it's close. They're in the same tier to me. The final guy worth mentioning here is Miles Sanders. He had 24 adjusted opportunities in his first game with Jalen Hurts, got a lot of work in the red zone. The reason I'm lower on Sanders than the other 3 is that I'm not entirely sold on his role sticking and this offense being magically reborn. They still have issues on the offensive line. Their pass catchers are bad, so I'm likely going to use Sanders, but I'm okay putting him 4th on this list. So to me, the ranking is Akers 1, Taylor 2, Montgomery 3, and Sanders 4. But there are a lot of reasons to like all 4 of these guys. So, Brandon, how are you feeling about this group, and where do they grade out for you relative to the studs like Derek Henry, Dalvin Cook, after considering their salary?
Could you imagine Derek Henry with Dalvin Cook's receiving ability?
Oh my,
that'd be something.
Let's make that happen.
So sorry, I just got distracted at the thought of that. So I like this range because I have to. The biggest issue is accurately comparing them to Henry and Cook this week. And I think Alvin Kamara is kind of back, sneakily.
He's back-ish. Yeah.
Not necessarily so super sneaky, but I think there's a lot to like about him. And if we're all looking at this other range behind Henry and Cook, I do like Kamara. So they don't necessarily stack up as well as someone like Derrick Henry. Obviously, the salary is not comparable. It's about a $3,000 gap between Henry and most of these guys. So I can't really compare them, but I think realistically, I can only do Henry or Cook, and then probably two of these guys. Whereas historically, I probably would have tried to jam in Henry and Cook. I don't think I have to do that this week. I think these guys have paths to upside. And if I had to rank them, I would put Cam Akers number one. He has the best snap. He has a better snap rate than Jonathan Taylor. He has the fewest issues. The Rams, I think we know, are okay running the ball whenever they need to and when they're ahead. So kind of view him as the number one here in this range. I think ultimately I'm going to rank them the same as you.
Yeah.
Taylor does have snap rate issues, both in the sense that he's around 55%. And we know that if anything goes awry, they could play Nyheim Hines instead of him. But he's got really strong adjusted opportunity numbers, a great matchup. Montgomery would be third for me. Over the past 3 games with Trubisky back, he rates out 7th in adjusted opportunities per game among main slate backs. And then Sanders would be 4th of these 4. Played 81% of the snaps last week. I like his role with Jalen Hurts. I'm going to talk about them in a second here. But I would also consider Kenyon Drake in that range. I would probably put him 5th. He might jump over Miles Sanders for me, but I think we have 5 at least solid backs between 74 and 66.
I think that Drake is at least in the same tier as Sanders, and I wouldn't be opposed to putting him higher because I think that offense will be more functionable. Is that a word? Whatever. Functional. Sure. Functional.
I'm just out here making up words, but
I trust you. Functionable. That sounds better. I think that offense has higher odds being functionable. So I think that I could definitely see putting Drake above Sanders. And I think he's in that tier. But I think that Taylor and Montgomery are in their own tier with Akers in his own tier. And I think that's the way I view things here. I also agree with you where I'm probably going to put 2 of these 3 guys in if I have a single dart, probably putting 2 of them in there. It might actually be Montgomery in that situation because I'm kind of intrigued by stacking him with Cook. But I was going to
say if I was playing a single entry lineup, I feel better from a floor and median perspective on Montgomery than I do with Taylor.
I mean, I'm okay burning single entry lineups personally.
Sure,
so I guess I don't really care too much about floor. I just think that the odds that game is back and forth and fun are higher than the odds the Titans game are back and forth and fun. So I'm not ranking Dalvin Cook above Derrick Henry, but mini stacks there, I can get behind it. Let's talk about Miles Sanders a bit more because you want to talk about this Eagles offense with Jalen Hurts. We have a 1-game sample now, and Hurts, he ran a whole lot. Now they go on the road to Arizona. Arizona can get after the passer, which could be a concern. But what did you see in that first game with the Eagles under Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, I wanted to look at this team because it's a new team now with Jalen Hurts, and I also want to play the Cardinals, so I need to make sure that the Eagles won't ruin the game. That's basically what I've been doing with trends this year, is making sure one team won't completely demolish the other side of things. So Jalen Hurts is going to get the start again. Was not flawless by any means, but was kind of fun for daily fantasy purposes. So digging in here. Ran 18 times last game for 106 yards, which is always coveted in daily fantasy because quarterbacks who run that much, I know he didn't score a touchdown, but quarterbacks who run can just rack up fantasy points. If he would have had a rushing touchdown, that'd be 16 plus fantasy points from rushing alone. And his salary is only $6,900, which is obviously very nice. But if we're not spending up for Mahomes in a particular lineup, I do think that there's at least one way to go below 7,000 with a quarterback, which is not something that we've been doing a whole lot of this year because that upside is kind of hard to find. And I think Hurts has it with, the 18 carries. He had a better per drop back passing than expected points number last week than Carson Wentz on the full season. Wentz is at negative 0.13, which is not good. And now Hurts is actually at 0.16 on the positive end overall this season, despite a low success rate. It's 44%, so he's more sort of big play dependent, but Wentz's success rate's 41%. So, I mean, it's very limited sample, but we've seen better efficiency from Hurts so far. His downfield attempt rate is 11%, which is not great. League average is about 17% there, but his ADOT is roughly league average, 7.9 yards, so that's fine. The Cardinals are 13th in adjusted pass defense, but 22nd in adjusted rush defense, which does matter for a rushing quarterback. So they're not necessarily the most worrisome matchup, and we should expect the Eagles to play up in pace because last week, if you look at their plays, whenever their pre-snap win probability was between 20 and 80%, according to numberFire, their pace was 32.3 seconds, which would rank 31st on the full season. Their pass rate would rank 28th on the full season in that sample. Part of that was like game flow and probably just trying to keep the Saints off the field as much as they could, but we could see a limited number of passes and plays, so that hurts the Cardinals a little bit, but playing against the Cardinals should help this get bumped up. And we did see that resurgence for Miles Sanders. You talked about him in more detail, so I won't go over him there. But the target shares were flat, so it is hard to stack. Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert had 6 targets for a 20% target share. Greg Ward, Miles Sanders each had 5 targets for about a 17% target share. You mentioned the receivers are bad. I understand where you're coming from, but I would have some intrigue. Some. And Jalen Reagor.
No.
He had both of the downfield attempts in pass catchers. He had a 15-yard ADOT, meaning his 4 targets were more equivalent to about 5.5.
You talk trash on the Bucks, and then you're like, Jalen Reagor.
His salary's $5,500, not $7,200.
It better be $4,500.
I'm just saying. I think that if you want to stack the Cardinals and you're not using Miles Sanders, Jalen Reagor can kind of make a lineup work. All it takes is one, baby. But there aren't many pass catch. I mean, frankly, Christian Kirk's a great play. I'm going to talk about him later on, so stay tuned for that. But the salary's $5,500, and there aren't many receivers in that range who are really eye-opening to begin with. So I think Reagor is somewhat in play. But I think that there's enough here from what I saw from Jalen Hurts to believe that they can stay relevant against the Cardinals, which helps me get on Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Kenny Drake, which is, again, what I was mainly looking at here.
Yeah.
But I think Jalen Hurts is actually kind of interesting at such a low salary, given what we saw from him last week. So can you trust this Eagles offense, or do you think that this game's going to ruin the Cardinals?
I trust them enough to use Kyler Murray. Do I trust them enough to feel good about Jalen Hurts? It makes sense. Jalen Hurts is probably a very good process play because of the running, and running matters so much. And his salary is low. I just have a really hard time, pressing the button just because I have concerns around the passing. This is not, analogous, but when Lamar Jackson was a rookie, remember he had a great floor because of his rushing, but never really accessed the ceiling because he didn't throw enough. They're throwing enough with Hurts where that's not an issue, but I'm not sure he'll have the efficiency to make the passing volume he gets really matter. And that's why I think that he's kind of going to be Taysom Hill-esque, where good floor. I'm not really sure where he generates a ton of upside, though.
So
he could.
This is not this is always flawed because it depends on touchdowns and things like that. But he had 19.28 Fanduel points last week by throwing for 1 touchdown, not rushing for a touchdown. But he had 18 carries, 106 yards. If he gets 80 yards and a rushing touchdown, he doesn't have to do a whole lot to get to 22, 23
If you guarantee me 80 yards and a rushing touchdown, I'll take it. But you can't guarantee that.
Okay, if we can't guarantee stuff, let's just end the pod. Because we can't guarantee stuff. But when someone has 18 carries, getting to like give them 40 yards and a rushing touchdown.
But like I could also just go $100 or $1,000 more to Tom Brady.
$1,000 goes such a long way.
You're right. Fine.
That's why I think he's interesting, because he could be the difference between getting like 3 solid receivers in addition.
No, you're right.
Versus,
I can see the point. You're right. Shush. You're right. I can see the point. But I think that they'll do enough where I can feel really good about Kyler. I think that Kyler is one of my favorite plays in this slate at quarterback. The running was back last week, so if I'm picking a running quarterback here, I'm going to go Kyler. I also think if I'm looking at game stacks here, I'm not opposed.
I do like Kyler more than Jalen Hurts for what it's worth. Straight up.
Yeah, I figured that. I think that like a fun game stack here is Kyler plus Kenyon Drake plus Miles Sanders, and then just kind of go crazy at wide receiver. I find that kind of intriguing, and I would not be opposed to running that. So I think that that's interesting for me, at least. So overall, I think that they'll do enough for me to be okay with the Cardinals. I will have a non-zero number of Jalen Hurts lineups, but he's not in consideration for me if I have a single bullet. And he will be one of my lower exposure quarterbacks for this slate. Like, he makes sense because of the rushing, but like, I think there are many, many paths to failure. And that's kind of why I'm concerned personally.
There aren't any other value quarterbacks I would consider him a value at that salary.
Yeah.
And yes, there are ways to quote unquote save at running back, but it's still, between 7 and like 68. It's not like they're 5,500. So I think that the 1,000 can go a long way here.
Yeah, I don't think there are any really super low salary backs I want to use this week. So
there aren't many super low salaried receivers I feel comfortable with either. So
yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's talk about the Chiefs. Now we talked about how there's no value. Let's talk about the Chiefs, because why not? The most traditional game to stack on this slate, at least for me, is the Chiefs versus the Saints. And it's a high total. It's a tight spread. I wish the Saints were a faster team. You sent me their pace numbers or Taysom Hill, and it's not that great. And the Saints defense is good. But I'm still tempted to be heavy on the Chiefs once again. We just have to dig in to see what they've done against good defense this year. And we actually have a pretty big sample here, because this will be the 7th time Mahomes has faced a defense ranked inside the top 10 against the pass based on numberFire's metrics. It's also his 4th straight game against a good team. So once they finally get like a non-good team, oh boy, Mahomes has averaged 24 Fanduel points per game against those opponents. That's despite having just 12 in one game where the Chiefs had a bunch of defensive and special teams touchdowns. They scored 43 points. He just didn't have to do much himself. He had 31 Fanduel points in one, 40 in another, and he can run it up when the situation is good enough. Another way to view this is in terms of raw points per game for the team. They're averaging 30.8 points per game against tougher defenses compared to 31.1 against lesser defenses. So sure, kick them down 0.3 points, but that's not enough where we need to worry about their players. So I'm going to be pretty high on Mahomes here, and that obviously would apply to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce as well. The Saints have led up 4 different 100-yard receiving games this year, including one to a tight end and Darren Waller, and obviously we think that Kelce's yardage upside is better than Waller's. 3 other players have gone for at least 90 against them. That includes 90-plus to both Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley back in Week 12, when their defense was playing well, when Taysom was quarterback. So in a similar situation, we saw guys who get good usage go off against them. So yeah, they're a good defense, but it should be a tight game. The Chiefs can light up anybody. So I'm going to go right back to the Chiefs once again, trying to get as much Mahomes, Hill, and Kelce as I can tolerate. And if that forces me to use 3 of those mid-range running backs, I'm okay with it. I think that in some lineups, I will do that. I was tinkering with lineups earlier, and I think that it'll probably be necessary for a Mahomes-Hill stack to go with 3 of the mid-range running backs, but I think that's actually a worthwhile trade-off on this slate. So, Brandon, where do you sit on this Chiefs offense relative to other offenses on this slate?
Yeah, they're the number one offense for me. They're the main thing is they're easy to stack. I went through the entire Buccaneers offense, and I don't feel great about anybody. I look at the Chiefs. It's Mahomes, it's Tyreek Hill, and it's Travis Kelce, and that's it. Everyone else is just an ancillary jabroni. Shout out to Rich Rebar. But it's true. And you talked about you chose the Chiefs against top 10 defenses.
Yeah.
I pulled numbers against top 12 pass defenses. So there's an extra game in there, but Mahomes is at 0.33 passing net expected points per dropback in that sample, a 57% passing success rate. Mahomes in a pretty solid sample of 6 games against top 12 adjusted pass defenses is a 0.33 passing net expected points per dropback. That would rank him third as a standalone quarterback on the full
behind
season.
Behind himself and
Aaron Rodgers. So that's why I liked him last week. Took him in the snake draft over Aaron Rodgers. That burned me, but Patrick Mahomes is just not that affected by good defenses. We've seen that. And so I think that he's the number one play. It's just an issue of, like you said, you're going to really have to probably build through those three of the value running backs, which is fine.
So I have 3 of them in there right now with Mahomes, Kelce, Michael Thomas lineup. A little hairy, but it can work, especially if we get Lynn Bowden. So rest up, Jakeem Grant. I'd rather have Devontae play.
Lynn Bowden's only, 2,100 less than Mike Evans?
Dick. He is actually. You actually picked the right number.
Yeah, for once. But no, that's why I think salary is, despite all the, again, it's not value at running back. It's like mid-salaried guys. It is hard to sort of pick through because the actual value at receiver is pretty bad.
I mean, Christian Kirk, so we swore off Christian Kirk on Monday on the podcast. I looked at his salary on Wednesday. I was like, oh, dang it. I'm going to make a mistake.
He's my third wide receiver in love.
What's that Taylor Swift lyric? You're looking like my next regret or something like that.
I don't know.
I think that it's something like that. It's either that or Katy Perry. One of those two said something like, you're looking like my next regret. That's Christian Kirk's face. She's just staring at his player profile on FanDuel. And that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I could see that. But again, love the Chiefs offense. I just think that I would play. So I think Jalen Hurts is in play because I can still play Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce
and I will say too that having Michael Thomas at 7,000 as opposed to 85 makes this a lot easier to stack too.
Yes.
Because he's very affordable at that number.
This game too is what's Taysom Hill 75. I don't really love him.
He's fine. I think that he's at least a consideration.
Yeah, like I said, this is one of 2 possible.
It's a 1.75 quarterback game.
Sure, and I would put the Eagles, Cardinals around there too. It's not like I am going to lock in Jalen Hurts into every lineup or anything like that. But I think these 2 games stand out from a quarterback standpoint. I had another point, but I think I lost it. This game, if you want to stack it, it's going to be Mahomes or Taysom, Tyreek, Kelce, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara. Those are your options, basically. Yeah. It's very possible that we see some weird touchdowns. These teams can do that, but the big games are going to come from where we know. And thankfully, the Saints, the Saints players aren't that high salaried.
Yeah. I'm not probably going to use Traquan Smith or Emmanuel Sanders, but they are options to you if you feel better. I personally don't feel good enough about them to go there, but if you feel better about them, they are low salaried. They're low salaried enough where it's not egregious. I'm just not going to get there personally, I don't think. But I think this is like I said, this is the traditional game stack where I can go through, if I'm multi-entry for a tournament, I can go out with Mahomes, Hill, Thomas. I can go Mahomes, Kelce, Thomas. I can go Mahomes, Hill, Kamara, et cetera,
right.
Run through those combinations. That's my comfort zone. So I'm pretty excited to do that for Sunday's slate. We're going to talk about bookmaker information in just 1 second. But first, for all of you Colorado listeners out there, FanDuel, Bud Light, and the Denver Broncos have partnered together to create the Bud Light Pick and Kick bonus with one goal in mind: to give you more ways to win this NFL season. The program is simple. For every field goal and extra point, the Broncos kicker, Brandon McManus, is on the COVID list, so we don't know who that'll be, makes against the Buffalo Bills on December 19th, fans will place a money line bet of at least $25 in the game will receive a $3 bonus added to their Fanduel Sportsbook account. If the Broncos kick 3 field goals and 3 extra points, that's $18 in bonus cash. But with Drew Lock, it's more like 17 extra points and maybe 1 field goal because he got bored at the end. December 19th is right around the corner, so crack open a Bud Light, watch Drew Lock sling some tutties, and download the Fanduel Sportsbook mobile app and place your bet today. I'm sure that they love that I ruined their read by talking about Drew Lock, but who could possibly disagree? My sentiment on Drew Lock. Either way, download the FanDuel Sportsbook mobile app, get a Bud Light, and place your bet today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's take a look at the bookmaker info for this slate. One of the better offenses on the slate is the Titans. They're obviously very good, facing the Lions, who are not very good. The problem is the Lions probably not going to have their quarterback, so the Titans are 10.5-point favorites here. Obviously, that won't scare us off Derrick Henry, though I do prefer backs and tighter scripts in general. It does give me a bit of pause with the passing game pieces, though, which I would love if Stafford were playing. So how are you feeling about this Titans offense against the Lions?
I honestly think it helps me with Derrick Henry because it's almost a guarantee that there won't be negative game script, and we've
That's
seen
true.
that
It does increase his floor.
Derrick Henry is not game script proof. We thought maybe he was trending toward that with the multiple targets. He does have multiple targets in 4 of 5 games, but I think that it honestly makes me feel better, and I'm okay with it. The real issue is the passing game. I play a lot of Ryan Tannehill because he's just efficient, even though the pass volume's not quite there. And again, this is not something that is like – it's hard to overstate how important it is to know who to stack your quarterbacks with. We know with this team. Half of the targets go to A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. Corey Davis' salary I wish would have came down a bit, but he's still $6,800. I don't think I can use either receiver heavily with such a big spread, but you know, if I were to play 150 entries in a tournament, I think Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, Tannehill stacks are just the easiest way to pivot away from Derrick Henry.
Yeah, like we've talked about this for 3 straight weeks, but like you could make a pitch for going Tannehill, Davis, Dalvin Cook as opposed to Derrick Henry.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do that last week, I don't think, but like I did the week before, and I should have done it more. I don't think I'll get there this week. It does make sense again, like you said, but I don't think I'll get there just because it's so hard to envision Chase Daniel keeping this game close. So it makes sense. Like it's a good tournament thought process. I just don't know if I will get there myself for this week. The second highest total on the slate is for the Colts against the Texans. It's at 51 right now, with the Colts favored by 7. 85% of the money is on the under here, which is why it's fallen to 1.5 from the open. Also, 80% of the money is on the Colts. So not a ton of faith in the Texans in the betting markets, but it's still Deshaun Watson. He could get Brandon Cooks back this week. So how are you viewing this game for stacking purposes, and will you get to Deshaun Watson?
I might. It wouldn't be like if I were playing a 20-entry tournament, I wouldn't get there. But again, if I was doing like a 150 entry, I think that it's a pretty easy one to stack, despite the fact that the Colts are very generous with their market shares to everybody. But we have Jonathan Taylor, and we have a resurgence from T.Y. Hilton. I think the salary is too high at $6,800, but he is second in target net expected points per target over the past 5 weeks among receivers with at least 20 targets, 19% target share. I think that it's a very easy one to stack between Deshaun, Brandon Cooks, Kiki Cutie, Jonathan Taylor, and then possibly T.Y. Hilton, but I probably wouldn't actually play Hilton, although Hilton against the Texans always seems to be a thing.
Yeah, it definitely is, as is Cutie against the Colts. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's also like kind of explainable because of the way they play defense, because they're like a heavier zone team. Like it's actually like not all that fluky, I guess. I've listened to smarter people than me talking about this situation. Like it makes sense that Cutie would do well. So I'm back on Cutie at $5,900. Definitely okay there. Prefer more Chad Hansen on that side. I also think I will get to Deshaun Watson this week because I think this spread's a little bit too large. I think it's an overreaction to the Texans game last week where they had nobody effectively. Like there was no Fuller, but then obviously no Brandon Cooks too. So I think to me, it makes a lot of sense to go with Deshaun Watson, pair him with Brandon Cooks, pair him with Kiki Cutie, and run it back with Jonathan Taylor or Hilton on the other side. So I think I like this game more than you would think based on the spread in this game. Usually I'm 5 points. I want to be within 5. I think that number, like I for covering the spread today, I was tempted to recommend Texans +7 as one of my recommendations. I didn't quite get there. There were other spots I like more, but I think that if I'm picking a side here, I'd pick the Texans +7.
Yeah, I like this game too, especially because there aren't many games to stack. I would not use Phillip Rivers, although he's very efficient.
I mean, if he's going to lose goal line work to Jacoby Brissett, like there's no reason to.
Very true. But yeah,
like he's awesome. He's playing really well. Kudos to Phil.
Yeah,
just not in my lineups.
Yeah, so I like this game, and again, I think it's very easy to stack. And Cooks is one of the few receivers in the 6,000 range I will play.
I'd agree. Outside of the Rams, we don't need to discuss. Like it's just Cam Akers. Like don't feel great about the pass catches there. The other team with the highest total on the slate is the Ravens. They're favored by 13 against the Jaguars. That puts their implied total at 30.25. They just have the same problem as the Rams. We're wondering if the other team can put up points. Now, I feel better about Gardner Minshew doing so than I do about Sam Darnold, but it seemed like this type of script was holding back the Ravens offense earlier this year in DFS, and now that problem might be back. So are you going at anybody here in a juicy matchup, but a bad game environment, or are you pretty much staying away?
I like Lamar, which is, the spread is an issue, but Lamar is the Ravens offense for the most part. We saw how explosive he can be just this past weekend, and the Jaguars don't really stop quarterbacks from running very well, so I think that there's a good floor for Lamar. I don't think he's the best tournament play, and I can't stack him with anybody, but I do think that he is very much in play for like a cash game format.
I think it helps with Lamar that they need wins for the playoffs. Like we're at the point in the season where you should consider those things. They need wins pretty badly, so I could see a situation where Lamar is, doing what he's done the past 2 games, which is running a lot and running effectively too. So I'm okay with Lamar. I think I'd agree with your assessment where I don't think he's the best tournament play. Would you rather have Lamar or Deshaun?
I was thinking about that just now because I initially had Lamar as one of my quarterback loves because I think he'll kind of get overlooked because of the game script, but I'll let you know by the time we get to player picks who I prefer.
I think I'm leaning Deshaun, but it's not because I don't like Lamar. I just think I do like Deshaun quite a bit. A game with any other pieces in that game, or is it just Lamar by himself?
I think it's just Lamar. I had interest in J.K. Dobbins at 5,900, but he's going to get like 15 carries, and he's going to kind of max out at best 100 yards and a touchdown. He doesn't get a whole lot of receiving, and they shouldn't have to throw. So.
Yeah, he's at 17.5, 13.1, and 13.3 Fanduel points the past 3 games because of touchdowns in all 3 of them. Mm-hmm. They effectively have phased out Mark Ingram, so it is a 2-back backfield, which is what we want. But like Gus Edwards still got some high leverage looks on Monday night.
Yeah, 2 tutties.
I would say that I'll probably have a non-zero number of J.K. Dobbins lineups, like if I'm trying to jam in Mahomes and Hill, but he's not like a 20% exposure guy for me. No,
he's like if you have to make a lineup work,
which I will.
Like I
will.
I initially thought he was a good play, but we this season have prioritized the ceiling because look, if J.K. Dobbins gets 60 yards and no touchdowns, no receiving work, you really have to make up for that. And if one of your if one of these mid-range running backs sort of puts up 10 fantasy points,
then you need to double make up for it. Well, you can't win a tournament that way.
Yeah, you need to think, can this guy make up for mistakes elsewhere? Because you're going to have mistakes, and I think that's key. And that's why ultimately I was a little more out on Dobbins.
I think that the way that Dobbins could conceivably have that ceiling is if he gets 2 touchdowns, and
Sure.
that is something that could happen. Do I think it's the most likely scenario? No, and that's why I'm lower. J.K. Dobbins, since his snap rate went up, 22% of the team's red zone opportunities. That's not very good. 63 yards per game. That's tough. So I'm going to use him, and I will have a non-zero amount of him, but it's tough. The other guy who is in that range, who I forgot to include in the injury section, is Jeff Wilson. Raheem Mostert might not be able to go for this game. Jeff Wilson, $5,800. We know he's going to get the red zone work, so that's definitely a plus there. 11 carries their last time out. He actually had 3 targets too. So would you prefer Jeff Wilson or J.K. Dobbins? Wilson's facing the Cowboys, which is not a game we want to consider, but like it is an objectively a good matchup.
Yeah, I mean we've seen him get touchdowns in the past. At least I'd probably still lean Dobbins for the offense.
Yeah,
I know they're going to move the ball.
Yeah, and I don't know that with Nick Mullins. Mostert didn't practice on Wednesday, so Wilson's an option. I think that he's kind of below Dobbins, though. Where, like, I agree with your assessment. We're like, I know that they'll score points. I don't know that with the 49ers. So I'll have Jeff Wilson, but, like, it's not a situation I feel great about by any means. A game with some interesting individual pieces is the Bears at the Vikings. This total has actually gone up. It was 46.5. It's now 47.5. Spread here is 3.5 points. So that should help us get jazzed about the skill guys here. And I actually think they're all kind of interesting. Is this a game you are looking for some mini stacks in? Because it's a 0 quarterback game, I'd assume. But like mini stacks, right?
Yeah, this is one of those where we know who to play.
Yeah,
and we have options. I think I recommended 3 Bears last week or something.
I think I have 2 this week.
Like we know Montgomery's in play, Allen Robinson's in play, Cole Comet is in play, and then on the other side we know who's relevant for the Vikings. It's Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, to some degree Irv Smith. I would also consider some risky lineups.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought you were going to say Darnell Mooney, and I was like, I don't want it.
No, they've been playing. I have a note here somewhere. Their full season, like with Trubisky back in the lineup, if you compare those numbers to like what they would rank in the full season, they'd be 5th in pass rate and 6th in pace. Whenever their pre-snap win probability is between 20 and 80%, it's been kind of a good enough spot. Like he hasn't. I don't know. He's been like average the past 3 weeks.
But like against terrible defenses. Oh, I guess Green Bay is not terrible, but like that most of his production came in garbage time. And then he faced 2 hideous defenses.
I'm just saying. I would consider it.
I'm not going to consider it. You did not mention Darnell Mooney. I just want to mention, because I had his player page pulled up, he had less than 10 FanDuel points last week despite scoring a touchdown. He has fewer 50-yard games this year than Irv Smith. So
seems less than ideal.
Less than ideal for sure. I think that for me, because this game is interesting, that increases my desire to use Dalvin Cook despite the not ideal matchup. It's not the worst matchup in the world. It's not ideal. But it also means that like stacking him with David Montgomery works a lot. Stacking with Allen Robinson works quite a bit. I like this script, and I think that's going to increase my exposure to Dalvin Cook and lower the gap between Cook and Derrick Henry. Again, Derrick Henry is the number 1 running back in the slate, but it helps that Dalvin Cook is in the preferred script. So I am going to increase him at least a little bit. Also, both these teams need wins. They're both 6-7 with an outside shot at the playoffs. So take that for what it is. Weather for this week, there's nothing. It is week 15. It is like December. There is a like tropical storm with snow on the East Coast, but there's no weather on Sunday, so we're all good. Let's move to our player picks for week 15 on FanDuel, starting off at quarterback. Brandon, who stands out to you there for this week?
I'm going to stick with Lamar. I think Deshaun, there's a lot to like there, but that's a divisional game. That's always a little bit of a concern.
Repeat for the second time in 3 weeks, too.
Yeah.
So yes.
So I think that's what ultimately is pushing me toward Lamar. I like Tom Brady a lot. I talked about him in detail, 7,900, but I'm going to stick with Lamar here as a play with a floor and obvious upside. Yes, he's a huge favorite, but the Jaguars are 21st against the pass, 28th against the rush based on numberFire's metrics, which adjust for opponent. They shouldn't be able to do a whole lot, honestly, to contain Lamar Jackson, who's just the focal point in the Ravens offense. He ran 9 times in limited action on Monday night. We've seen him go for 0.26 passing net expected points per dropback in 5 games against bottom 10 pass defenses. I know the pass volume is a concern, but we do want passing efficiency. And the Jaguars are 24th in rushing net expected points per carry allowed to quarterbacks. So I think Lamar, again, they need wins. There's no reason to think that Lamar is limited, and we know that he can just – you look at his rushing numbers, he's got like 11, 13, like it's great, and that's what we want. So
he ran 9 times on Monday, but scored 9 touchdowns on those rush attempts.
Yeah. So I think that there's a clear floor. I think there's upside for Lamar, and I think that even though the game doesn't set up, I think he's in a great spot. My second love is Jalen Hurts. I think the salary savings he can get us is worth it some of the time. He ran 18 times in his last start for 106 yards, has decent enough passing efficiency for me to think that he can move the ball against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are a pace-up game for the Eagles. They are 31st in rushing success rate allowed to quarterbacks, 30th in rushing net expected points per carry allowed to quarterbacks. So that sets up well. I think it's the right profile. I think I like the game more than a lot of other games. It's probably second for me, honestly, at this point. I might be overestimating his passing ability. His on-target numbers are not good this year. The Cardinals do have a good pass rush, but I'm willing to risk it for this salary to help open up some things and not have to dig into the pretty bad range of receivers.
Would you run him by himself, stack him with Sanders, or how would you view that?
So if I'm playing Jalen Hurts, I'm probably playing him with Miles Sanders, occasionally with Jalen Reagor, but also then possibly DeAndre Hopkins and then Christian Kirk.
Right. Game stacks are very easy there, and I think that's helpful. My first love is not a bold one. It's Patrick Mahomes, but I just think he's so hard to pass up in a competitive game. And like, we talk about matchups all we want, but like game and environment to me matters more. And this is like the Saints are one of the Super Bowl champions, in part because they expect Drew Brees back. But like, it's not going to get much more competitive than this, and that makes me want to ensure I get to Patrick Mahomes. But we also get Mahomes with Tyreek Hill healthy in a dome. We had that against the Chargers and the Raiders earlier in the year and didn't necessarily light it up the Chargers in that game, but it's objectively a good thing to play with no wind. I don't really care what the results say. It's a good thing to play with no wind, and there are enough mid-range options that running back make it easy on us, so I'm going to get to Patrick Mahomes as often as I can. My second love is Kyler Murray. He got back to running last week, which is all I really needed to get back on board here. He had 13 rush attempts in that game. He had 15 total the previous 3 games combined. And the Eagles defense, probably not as bad as the perception of them. I know people like to rag on the Eagles, but like they're super banged up right now. Like everyone is hurt in the secondary. Kyler might not put up good passing numbers, but doesn't really need to if he's going to run 13 times, and his salary is really low at $8,000. So I think Kyler's awesome.
Not the greatest passing numbers. Possible chance of 15 carries.
Shush. Who's the better runner?
It's Kyler.
Okay, then we're done. Which team is going to score more points? It's the Cardinals.
Cardinals.
Yeah. Also,
I'm just saying,
when I say passing numbers, I don't mean he's going to be bad. I mean he might have league average efficiency. I'd project lower than league average for anybody in this Eagles offense. You could put Michael Vick reincarnate back. I mean, I know he's not dead, but like you could put him back in the Eagles offense, and I would still project below average passing efficiency. Okay. It's not about Hurts. It's about the offense.
That's fine.
They don't have DeAndre Hopkins and the best receiver in football, Christian Kirk, and inactive Andy Isabella. I'm not tilted. Anyway, let's go to running back. Who do you have there?
I think there might be 8 running backs that I'll play this week. I think it's the 6 we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And then I guess Miles Sanders and
Drake. That's 7. Okay, that's 8. And dabbles of Dobbins and sprinkles of Wilson.
Maybe, yeah. So I think it's pretty concentrated. It is chalky, but chalky running backs can pay off. You don't have to differentiate at running back very often. So I'm going to start with Derrick Henry, 10,200. The Lions may not keep pace, but like I said, that might be good for Henry because there's just less chance of negative game script for him. The Lions are 30th against running backs and rushing success rate allowed, rushing net expected points per carry allowed as well. He's locked in for me. He's the RB1 on the slate. Even with the pass catching concerns, there still are multiple targets in 4 of his past 5 games, but I'm not going to overthink this one. Henry's the number 1 pretty easily for me. My second love is Alvin Kamara. I've been out on Kamara since Taysom Hill took over, but last week we saw a resurgence for him as a receiver. He had 10 targets, scored on a red zone rushing touchdown. There are obvious concerns that the team trails in this game, but 2 things. 1, the Chiefs don't really care about stopping the run by design. That's good for Kamara. 2, negative game script can lead to more targets for Kamara here this week. So I think they figured out something, getting Kamara involved. There's a floor concern, yes, but Kamara we know what his upside is. We know how good Alvin Kamara is with the ball in his hands. He should get the ball in his hands in this game. So I think Kamara has the best upside of any of the non-Cook and Henry backs, and I feel good in saying that. His salary is not that much higher than other running backs we're considering in that mid-range, and I don't want him to get lost in the shuffle this week for me. My third love is Jonathan Taylor. Not a big surprise, but I'll differentiate more at quarterback, receiver, and tight end if I need to. I'm not going to stray away from some good plays at running back that once we have them. 7,400 against the Texans. I think it's just a smash spot, the proverbial smash spot. 24.3 adjusted opportunities per game over the past 3 weeks. 21 Fanduel points per game in that span. Over 137 scrimmage yards per game. The snaps are a bit concerning, but the Texans are last in rushing success rate allowed to running backs. I think that Rivers is going to be efficient and move the ball. So I think Taylor is very much worth the salary. And again, I like Kenyon Drake at 6,600, and we haven't talked about him enough. But
to back up your point on Kamara, it was not just because of garbage time that he got those targets. He actually had 5 targets in the first half. So I think that helps Kamara as well. I don't know if I necessarily say he has the third best upside. That might be Cam Akers. But I think that I think we're if you don't think that, I think you're writing off Alvin Kamara too soon. I mean, I just don't like Taysom Hill. Anyway, my first love is Dalvin Cook. Obviously, I love Derrick Henry. I agree with Brandon's thoughts there. I think that the narrower range of outcomes is probably a good thing, like Brandon said, for him, whereas it would not be for most running backs. But Dalvin's good because I like this game. I'm wondering if people might be too low on Cook this week because he wasn't super popular last week in a tough matchup. People likely view this Bears team as being a tough matchup too, but Dalvin got a salary decrease all the way down to $9,400. He had 38 adjusted opportunities in their first game against the Bears this year, so I'm going to prioritize Derrick Henry, but my gap in exposure between Henry and Cook will be lower than the Fields. That's the way that I'll phrase that there. My second love is David Montgomery because similar to Dalvin, I think that I like Jonathan Taylor a lot at the same salary, but I want to be overweight on Montgomery because of the script. I'm guessing people will go to Taylor because his matchup seems better on paper, but the Vikings 31st in success rate allowed to opposing backs. Montgomery also has a better red zone workload. He's at 39% of the red zone chances in his full games with no Tariq Cohen. He ranks second on the slate among those whose most relevant sample is at least 3 games in that red zone share behind just Dalvin Cook. So I'm going to game stack Cook and Montgomery pretty often. Again, straight up, I'm ranking Henry above Cook and Taylor above Montgomery, but I do want to make sure I'm overweight on these 2 guys specifically. My third love is Cam Akers. I just think that he's the best option in that mid-range. It's a tough situation because they're so heavily favored, but they wiped the Patriots pretty easily last week, and Akers got 37, 35, 8 carries. And I feel better about that because of how much red zone work he's gotten the past 2 weeks. He has 56% of the team's total chance in the red zone the past 2 weeks. So I think they're going to be in the red zone plenty against the Jets. So Cam Akers, my number 1 in the mid-range and probably the number 2 running back on the slate for me overall behind Derrick Henry. Let's move now to wide receiver, Brandon. Who do you have there?
Just quickly, on fansharesports.com, The two running backs with the most tags so far are Jeff Wilson and J.K. Dobbins. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I mean, like, it makes sense to like talk about them, but like they're just not as good plays as like Akers. Like, why would they be above Akers?
A lot of people like to spend down at running back. It's more exciting to spend up.
I mean, J.D. McKissick was popular last week. That's wild.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to throw that out there because we talked about those two specifically as afterthoughts, but it sounds like they might.
Like, I think they're 10 to 15% exposure type guys for me.
Sure. All right. I'm going to talk about Allen Robinson because I talk about Allen Robinson, I think, every week. His salary is $7,300. We both like this game. If I'm spending up at running back or even in the mid-range, I can't always spend up for Tyreek Hill, so I'm not going to go there for the love, even though I obviously love Tyreek Hill for this week. Robinson's not in that tier, but there's a lot to like over the past 3 games with Mitchell Trubisky back.
Yes.
Sorry, Mitch.
Yes. Sorry, Mitch.
That was the joke.
And you go back to Mitch, right?
That was the joke. Mitchell Trubisky. Robinson has a 29% target share. That's 11 targets per game, 1.3 downfield targets, 2.7 red zone targets per game in this span. Just overall in this offense, there's been a lot of volume his way. 9, 9, 13, 7, 13 targets over the past 5. Leads to a floor and ceiling, and again, we both like this game. My second love is actually just going to be Brandon Cooks because it's kind of a wasteland in this tier. I do like Brandon Ayuk at 6,900. I almost went with Ayuk just because of the ON for Brandon, which is it's important. The IN always.
I actually almost went Ayuk in mine as well.
That's a hard salary though. He's very close to a lot of
hard salary for a bad game.
Yeah. He's amazing. His role's amazing, but
does that make him like this week's honorary Allen Robinson or Terry McLaurin? Because that's usually my issue with them.
Yeah, that's kind of fair.
Okay, so Brandon Ayuk is the Terry McLaurin good player, bad game of the week.
Sure. Cooks, though, over the past 5 weeks, is third in route rate among healthy main slate receivers. He's running 97% of the routes in games that he's played in. Trails only DeAndre Hopkins and coincidentally Terry McLaurin, just barely. But I mean, he's on the field. We like that game. In one game without Will Fuller, which is against the Colts, he had 8 targets for 65 yards. Not great, but 105 air yards. His ADOT was 13.1 yards. 2 downfield targets. So I think that there's a lot to like for Brandon Cooks this week in a pretty tough range. And my third love, I already said this, but Christian Kirk at 5,300. He's definitely trending downward, which is exactly what you want to hear out of one of my love candidates, but it's true. He has 6 or fewer targets in 5 straight games, just 7 total over the past 2. However, among active main slate receivers over the past 5 weeks, I know it's an arbitrary and short cutoff, but he's 11th in route rate run, 93%. Hasn't led to much downfield work, just 5 downfield targets over those 5 games. But, Kyler Murray has a shoulder injury. He's getting healthier. He's getting farther removed from his injury. He's still not slinging it. That's a bit of a concern, but Kirk still has a 10.1 yard ADOT from him in this span, faces an Eagles team that's 26th in target success rate allowed to receivers. So I think that Kirk is very viable for that salary.
Like I said, like I looked at him and it brought me back in with that salary. So I agree. It's a banged up secondary. Like I'm probably going to have some Christian Kirk, even though I don't feel great about it. It's tough not to. My first love is Calvin Ridley. We should downgrade the offense when Julio is out, but Calvin Ridley is like the exception. In the 6 games where Julio's been out or limited, Ridley has 27% of the overall targets and 52% of the deep targets. He's had 110 or more yards receiving in 3 of those games. He had 90 in another, even though he left one of those games with an injury. He gets to play at home. He's in one of the better games in the slate. This is in a dome. I think that Calvin Ridley is due for an eruption, and that could very well be here. So I like Calvin Ridley a lot this week.
Big regression candidate, just overall.
A Falcons receiver is a touchdown regression candidate?
Not touchdowns, just fantasy
regression.
points. He actually scored about the right amount of touchdowns, but just in general.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. My second love is Kiki Cutie because last week was rough, but it was also tough to expect the offense to click with Brandon Cooks being out. He should be back this week, and that allows me to get back on Cutie. I know that's weird, but like that's the way things kind of work in the NFL. They get to play against a zone-heavy defense. Cutie had 9 targets with 4 deep against the Colts a few weeks ago. I prefer him over Chad Hansen on this team at $5,600. So Cutie for me. I like Cooks too, though, as you mentioned. My third love is Lynn Bowden. Like I said, I prefer him if either one of Devontae Parker or Jakeem Grant's able to play so that the offense doesn't totally collapse. But like I'd initially said I wouldn't use him if they both played. I actually might change my tune on that now because like he did play a lot early in that game last week. They need speed with Mike Gesicki out, so
I can't use a third receiver.
But like he was kind of getting work.
Wrong.
He was kind of getting work over Jakeem Grant, and Gesicki being out opens up targets. So will he be a third receiver? Who can say? Who could say? He had 9 targets in week 14.
Can't guarantee anything, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
prove me wrong, bro. He had 9 targets. 3 of those were deep. 82 receiving yards, which is kind of more upside than I thought he might have. And he also got the ball in a couple of attempted trick plays. So it's not quite a Debo or Ayuk situation where they give him a lot of rushing attempts, but like, it helps. They want the ball in his hand because he's a good football player. So I will use Bowden at $5,000. Kirk would probably be the first guy I'd pivot to if I decide to not go with Lynn Bowden. Like if the injury situation breaks in a bad way, probably would wind up going there. Looking at other guys, yeah, maybe get. Oh gosh,
the Gallup Ayuk mini stack's gonna win someone something.
Ugh. Is anyone else here who can like
Jalen Reagor?
Traquan's not the worst play.
Traquan or Manny?
Traquan, he's lower salaried. I can't like either, so I'll just take the one with less salary. Okay. I guess. I don't know. Whatever. Let's move to tight end. Brandon, who do you have there for this week?
I have Logan Thomas at 5,600. I once again think Kelsey is a priority play. I've been saying that for a long time. It's not like
I think that if you're not considering Kelsey for a single entry tournament, you should think longer about it. Yeah.
I think that I actually have like a comparison. I think a Kelsey Cutie, 2v2 versus like a Logan Thomas, Calvin Ridley is very comparable. I might prefer Kelsey and Kiki Cutie.
Yeah.
So that's why I think Travis Kelsey is just such a standout play, even at the salary. I know tight end historically is hard to predict, but he's just an outlier there with the volume and the downfield work he gets. But Logan Thomas is running 96% of the routes over the past 5 weeks. We saw him dip in the middle of the season. He's trending back up. He's the only tight end above 90% in that sample. He's gotten a solid enough volume with 16 targets over the past 2 weeks in tougher matchups. The Seahawks do rate out top 5 in targets success rate allowed to tight ends, but I mean, he's a solid bet to be top 5 in targets. He has some red zone usage, so I mean, there's at least that. Tight end's kind of bad outside of Kelsey. My second love is Cole Komet at 5,100. He's trending up at least 7 targets in each of the past 2 games. That works out to 21% of the targets, which ranks him 6th among tight ends on the main slate in that span. Running 60-ish% of the routes, playing about 80% of the snaps. Vikings are 31st in target success rate allowed to tight ends this year. So he's got a pulse. He's a tight end. The salary's fine. It's kind of all you can ask for sometimes.
Yeah, they've got some linebacker injuries too, which are not necessarily a good thing. So I think that Komet is a good play. I didn't wind up going there because I figured Komet would get a lot of buzz this week. Wanted to find some alternatives, one of which is in that same game in Irv Smith. If you're not spending it for Kelsey, you got to save. And I think that Smith actually has upside for the position. He has not exceeded 5 targets in a game yet, but still has 3 50-yard receiving games. One of those was last week when he was on a limited snap count. I think he'll be full this week based on the injury report on Wednesday. Got his first full practice since week 9. So I think that Irv Smith works in that same game. The other pivot off of Komet would be Adam Shaheen. He took over the Mike Gesicki role after Gesicki got hurt. He ran 22 total routes. 13 of those were from the slot, and 1 was out wide, according to Pro Football Focus. He's only a $300 discount from Komet. But again, if we're expecting Komet to be popular, I think that it's worthwhile to consider pivoting. I would look at Shaheen there. It's pretty thin, and it could go poorly, but he was scoring touchdowns this year, even when he didn't have a full role. So
yeah, because I played Mike Gesicki every week, and it always be Was it Durham Smythe, or am I misremembering that even?
Durham Smythe, yes. Also was there. Mac Hollins looks like Mike Gesicki's clone from afar. So like that one's also Mac Hollins is like thick for a wide receiver. Like he looks like a tight end. So like they all look the same. They're all the same thing. But I'll go with the low salaried one, Adam Shaheen, and check out him there. Who do you have at defense to finish things up, Brandon?
I'm gonna say the Titans, but I need to mix up all my exposure to defense because I learned that the hard way last week, being very heavy on.
You have 100%?
No.
Okay, but I had 65% Panthers, and I'm still okay with it.
Yeah, so I was at like 65 or 70%. But
it was. I think I had one Cardinals lineup because of Daniel Jones. Love using defenses against Danny Dimes. But then it was all Cowboys and Panthers. Yeah, I've never done that in my entire life, and probably will never do it again.
Yeah, I need to shuffle it up more just for sanity, but I think the Titans are a good play at 3,900. They can give up points. Just not sure how many the Lions can score. If Stafford's out, if Kenny Galladay's out, they should be playing from behind. It's one of the higher paced games of the week as well. Should lead to sacks and turnovers, which is where Fanduel points primarily come from for defenses. They are last in pressure rate. It's not what you want, according to Pro Football Reference, but Chase Daniel has taken a sack on 9% of his dropbacks in the past 3 years. They're going to be one of the defenses I build around.
They're bad defense, but like bad defense can pay off in DFS. I've used the Raiders. I've used the Cowboys. Those have both been fine. I will use the Titans as well. My love is the Vikings. I'm obviously okay using the Bears, and I will use the Bears. But a lot of the reasons I like the Bears are reasons that I like the Vikings defense because it's probably going to be a competitive game. We'll probably see some dropbacks in the Bears. Those are good things. Mitchell is Mitchell. They have made big gains defensively since the start of the year. They're up to 16th now against the pass based on numberFire's metrics. They're probably not going to generate a pass rush because they don't really have guys who can do that outside of Afadio Denebo, who is the best pass rusher in all of football.
You just want to say his name.
I love Afadio Denebo. He's the best. They did score 10 Fanduel points against the Bears earlier this year, and that was on the road. They had 13 against Jacksonville without a touchdown. So Afadio Denebo going to lead the Vikings to a 14-point Fanduel output this week.
You want to bet on that exact total?
Yes. I would also want to bet on Mike Evans having exactly 100 plus yards and 2+ touchdowns.
Yes.
So those are the two bets this week. Vikings at exactly 14 Fanduel points. Mike Evans both over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even odds for both, please. I'll mortgage my non-existent house.
Yeah.
On this. That is all that we have for this week. Brandon, any final thoughts for you on week 15 before we close up shop?
I would say the thing with the running backs, like you say, go ahead and rank them, but really figure out where you want to be overweight, maybe underweight. You can try to just play the same amount of them, but I will naturally end up with more of some than the other. And right now, we already ranked them, so I don't need to do it again.
I think the guys I'm most going to be actively overweight on are Montgomery and Cook, just because I think that I'm higher on that game than most. So, yeah, I think that, like you said, find the guys you want to actively be overweight on. Make sure you get enough exposure to them to benefit if they go off, and then kind of go from there. But also, look at the games, check out the injury reports, decide which ones you want to stack there, because I think there are opportunities to play things like we tend to, where you just stack games based on how you like them. That is all the time that we have for today. But tomorrow we have our final snake draft of the season. Brandon has a lead. He has won 5 times so far this year. I've won 4 times. JG Zach Reason has also won 4 times. So it all comes down to our week 15. It's a week 15 snake draft. We only have... It's 14. Okay, math. Never mind. Anyway, our final snake draft of the season is tomorrow. So make sure... Wait a minute.
No. We missed Thanksgiving. We didn't do it on...
Thank you. Okay, I thought I was going insane, or just couldn't do math.
I should have. Oh, that'd have been great if I just.
I'd be gone for days. Anyway, final snake draft of the season is tomorrow, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on the Fanduel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope. RIP Periscope at some point. Anyway, it'll be there tomorrow, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on the Fanduel YouTube and other places. So make sure you subscribe there to watch it at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Also giving out a ticket to the Fanduel Sunday Million there. Check it out, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Do not forget to subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, where can people find you and yell at you on Twitter? Don't ever yell on Twitter, right?
Gadula13, GDULA. Please don't yell at me on Twitter.
You didn't say your full handle. You stopped after Gadula.
GDULA13? I thought I said that.
Anyway,
I was having like the thoughts of people yelling at me.
Is the @Gadula handle taken?
I think I picked that up actually.
You have it?
I think.
Why aren't you using it?
Yeah, it's not verified. Also, I don't care. Like, I'm gonna do me. It's my humble assault on the commonplace to have a number in there.
Okay, buddy. I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the Fanduel Podcast Network at Fanduel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to enter the Listener League, too. Good luck to you in Week 15. We'll talk to you again on Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.